All right. Good evening, LinkedIn. Dave Wilson of the Ring of Hire Show. Well, how the hell are you, Kylie?
I'm good. You know what? Especially with tonight's topic, I have a job, so I remind myself regularly that I'm one of the lucky ones in the economy
That's
the way it is right now.
that's what I say every day.
Yeah.
Tonight, everybody, the topic's going to be layoff. Like I said, layoff. Now what? And then we're going to go over a lot of some techniques for job searchers, and we're going to be right back after this. I love change, but I'm going to call this or email this company of this new software this week and say, listen, somebody needs to get laid off there or something because, I told you before, I love change. It's a great software, but every time I turn around, something on this goes like, all right, what the heck is that?
Yep.
And where is this? So how you been, young lady?
Just living life. Just getting through. I feel like that's just kind of the climate of the world right now. It's to tonight's point, it's an interesting thing to be obviously grateful that I'm
Yeah.
not in a position, which is funny enough how you and I met because I was in that position.
You were in a position. Yep. I remember
But
that. How
also
long ago was that almost? That
two
feels like,
years,
wow,
2 years
that
this
long.
month.
Carly, I
Or
noticed
I'm
on
sorry,
your
2 years
LinkedIn
next month.
profile, you're in Maitland, Maitland,
Yeah.
Florida. Did you change, or I thought it was a different name? I looked at it, I was like, what? Where
No, it's just north of Orlando.
is it? Okay, I was
Yeah.
I was curious. What's the weather like down there right now? It's pretty warm, right?
Right at this particular moment, it is 76, feels like 76. So no crazy humidity, which I am really grateful for. But
Right,
we had like a true winter this year, which was lovely.
right.
Obviously no snow. It's not that kind. Although North Florida did get it was like a foot of snow.
Hey, I heard, and it's good to be back. We had a little break there. I had the hernia surgery. I'm all mended back. That was an experience. I never want to go through that again. So I'm done. And we've been having a hard time now. We want to try to get back to every 2 weeks for everybody. And but tonight's subject, when we talk about layoff, that word layoff, now what? I'll tell you on LinkedIn, and I know we were talking before the show. Wow, first of all, you're fortunate you have a job right now, but never. I don't take it for granted. Never.
No, me
No.
either.
And we talked right before this. You got to work harder, and to keep that and focused. But the big thing when I talk about a layoff is it's the rumor. You get that
Like a
rumor,
gut
hey,
feeling.
yeah, from everybody, hey, don't tell, don't say this, don't guess what.
I think
I
the
heard
worst though is when nobody is talking about it. You just have that pit in your stomach. You can feel change happening. You don't
uh,
know why. And you just kind of, you're like, am I going to be a part of this? Am I reading into it? Is this my PTSD from prior layoffs? Like,
see, yeah, and I think everybody goes through that feeling of emotions, because
yeah.
you're like, all right, what have I done? You think they'll get rid of me? I mean, that's just going to be a common reaction. And I believe, I don't care who you are and what type of position, it's still, that's your livelihood that, they're coming back to you now. And I see it on LinkedIn a lot more to where some colleagues are like, they've had 3 companies that they've worked for in the last year and they got laid off.
Yep. And something that I'm really cognizant of when I'm going through resumes, and actually something that I coach my hiring managers on when I do those initial intakes,
Right.
is look, I'm going to send you resumes for people who have had 3 jobs since 2020. What I'm looking at is their tenure and what they did prior to that, because
Right.
you can't judge anybody since 2020. It changed the climate of the world. It changed job
Yeah.
security. It changed the way companies function, how quickly they are willing to get rid of good talent.
Right.
And so I opt not to gauge someone. I'm the first one. I'm like, well, but your tenure in your two places prior to COVID was 10 years each. And now
Right.
you've had three jobs. Let's have a conversation about that, versus just ostracizing people
People.
off of their most recents. And I think it's a mistake that a lot of recruiters make is not taking the time. And I also think that that's a mistake that AI makes.
Yeah.
And
Same.
you take the human element out, and those compassionate pieces, like looking at prior
Right.
to the economy turning upside down, those all go away.
Well, I want to bring up the subject real quick. So I told you I was on Facebook today,
Hmm.
and I saw this ad that showed us the boss was talking to the coworker saying, "Hey, we're sorry, but the rumor's true. We're going to be doing a layoff." And she's like, "Oh, that's okay. I knew about it." And she's like, "Well, how did you know about it before me?" She says, "Well, I went to the website and it's called Warn Act, and you put your state. So we'll put that in there, Warn WARN space Act ACT, and put your state." So I did that, and I put Pennsylvania. And sure enough, when you open it up and you put your state, any companies with mainly like about 100 employees or more, and it's by law that they have to give a 60-day notice and being posted. So by going to this site, again, it's Warren Act and your state, you can see a lot of the companies. And I went to mine and I saw a lot of the companies because it breaks it down by the months and the years that you can go back, and it gives you the warning notice. And these companies that I looked at just in February are ones that I know that have been laid off, people laid off, or closure.
What I'm curious about, and I had mentioned this to you prior to the show, and I think it's something that we should do a little digging and maybe
Yeah.
give an update when we come back, in a week or two, is, let's say, for example, my time with Sears. Their corporate headquarters are in Chicago, I believe.
Right.
So my curiosity is, I live in Florida. If I'm pulling up the Florida WARN Act, I'm
And it's
likely
not
not
there.
going to see that, right? So if you're working remotely, or if you're working in an office that is not your corporate headquarters and it doesn't show up on there, maybe go ahead and take a pull on that and look, for example, for me, WARN Act Illinois, and maybe it would have shown all those COVID layoffs. Where when I looked at Florida's,
Oh, I get it.
even though I worked here in an office in Longwood,
Right.
and when I pulled it up for 2020's list, it did not come up. So if you are looking into it, to give yourself kind of that buffer heads up that maybe it's coming, be mindful of where your company's headquarters are and take a look that way. I don't know that that's 100% the case. We will do a little digging and report back, but that's my thought.
Yeah, because even here, like I know Muller's Pizzeria, they closed, and 4/16/25 it closed, and I was like, wow, that's a pretty. It's a it's an app to where I guess I mean just to Google it. I don't know if I'd like to see my company's name on it or not.
No, of course
I
not, but
mean,
it does give you that heads up, right? If you're being vigilant and staying on
yeah,
top of not telling yourself that you're gonna be the one spared from what the economy has done to so many others, that sets you up with, as you said, a 60-day notice of something
right,
that could be happening to you, to get yourself out there and to network.
to put it. So I put it in
And
the.
you said 4/16, so that mean you said it's 60 days that they have to give ahead of?
Yeah, it's 60-day notice.
Okay.
60-day notice. So there's some parts of it at 30 days it says 60. But like I said, next time we come on, we'll both dig into that a little bit. But
Yeah.
I see the companies and it breaks it down for the last 6 months. So I could go back there and it says whether they were laid off or a closure too. So it's, I never heard of that. And I'm
So I'm
sure a lot of
actually
people.
looking at Florida's on here, and it goes all the way back to 2017.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
I
I
haven't
can go
gone.
back and pull it.
Yeah, it even goes through the. All right, then let me see. Yeah, 2020. All right, Pennsylvania, it only goes back to looks 2023. That's
Okay.
something,
Yeah.
you
So
know?
maybe it was something that was newer implemented or not required. They were testing it out. But yeah, Florida's goes all the way back to
Yeah, because
2017.
it comes through the Department of Labor and Industry,
Okay.
Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that's, you're talking legit. You're not, this is legit. They wouldn't put this on here when I pay attention to a lot of the things around here on the Lehigh Valley, and I'm like, whoa, GXO. I knew they cut back. I get employees all the time from there, but it said a closure or layoff, and it said that it affects 91 people. So that's even something how they put the number in it.
Yeah, I saw some of them that said it was only impacting one person. There was another
Right.
one in Florida that came up for me that had it was 930.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll tell you, that's a good tool. I mean,
yeah.
let's face it, you could really actually a recruiter could use that.
In
I'm just
every way.
saying.
Nope,
Just
in
saying.
every way, you know what's coming.
You know, what a way to where if I'm like, all right, let me see, GXO, great company. They're still there, but they had a layoff. Huh. Where do I target my ads? Right there I
Well,
go. But
but
you know what? That's the way it goes though. That's fair game. It's you're only helping people.
but also as a recruiting tactic, if you're taking that link that clearly a lot of people don't know about, and you specify their company when
Yeah.
you reach out on LinkedIn to say, "Hey, I think you could be a good fit for an open position I have. Here's the link. I heard your company's doing layoffs."
Oh, you mean for
Biggest ta
sales going after?
Yeah, for poaching. Like, obviously, that's I'm
Wow.
sure some people will tell me that that's not, the best way to do it, but
My
that's the
mind's gonna be
job,
going
right?
crazy tomorrow. I'll be
Uh-huh.
like, "Uh-huh. What
Absolutely.
is the good areas? What a great tool." I mean, for both though, it's not the more I'm talking about it, I think it can be used both ways to benefit people because what a way to say, "Hey, we're short 50 people or even 10 or 5," and you got people that are skill set in that same industry. Hey, it's game on. And I know a company that's closing, listen, back in the day, I said back in the day in the 90s when we had a layoff at the paper mill, they actually hired, they were called headhunters back then.
Yeah.
It was a headhunter, not like it is now as versus, but they hired companies to come in and they had classrooms set up for everybody to go downstairs if you were getting laid off. So I thought that was pretty cool that they wanted to find work for you,
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
and
I
I don't
feel like back then there was a lot more heart in employment than there is now. It wasn't so transactional, it was more personal. You knew your employees' wives and husbands' names and their kids' names, and, there were
yeah,
relationships being built, and I think a lot of times leadership does not dig in that way anymore, and probably for
right.
safeguarding on their own also, because they can't control whether or not you're going to be a part of a mass layoff, and so the
Yeah, and
climate
that's a
today is not the same. You're not gonna get people bringing in other companies to help out. They're just gonna let you go.
they let you go. And when you always say to yourself, it's when you get that word, what goes through your mind first, and I think a lot of it's a communication. And when you do a little research on, hey, what happens when you do get laid off? I mean, they were talking about, you got to breathe, you got to take some once you get some time, you got to take some time off to kind of absorb it in a way, to get yourself prepared mentally. Because some people, I mean, listen, if you got like 8 months to a year with a job, I know that's heartbreaking. It is. But when you got 10 years or
Yeah.
15 years or 20 years, wow, that just really has got to punch you right in the stomach for that long of a time.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also the other side of it is it's hard to convince people to take the time to lick their wounds. And I do
Right.
think that whether you're with a company for 6 months or for 10 years, you're not necessarily at that point mourning the company because I think there's a lot of anger. And I
Right.
think that's the natural reaction. But it's panic. It's sheer panic of how am I going to pay my but for most of the world. I think that obviously you have some people who have high enough level positions that
Right.
they're very comfortable and they can afford to take that time. But for most of the world, that's not the case.
It's not.
And
No, I agree.
so yeah, I think telling yourself to center, to take a minute, even though that feels impossible when
Yeah.
you're panicking and scared and you don't know how long you can do it. And especially, let's talk about Florida. Our unemployment benefits, it doesn't matter if you make $400,000 a year, it is 275 a week. That is your max
It,
benefit.
wow. Pennsylvania is 575. And
Right.
that's at the kind of max, but then, for each child, then on top of that. But I
Oh,
think
see,
it's
they don't
only
give anything for children in Florida.
you own $275?
275 a week, that's it. So for
How the
somebody in my state, like, I think if I were to lose my job right now, that doesn't cover anything. I have, you're living on your savings and
Does it matter when they're based with being remote? Does it matter what you said before? Does it matter when if they're in a different state and they're doing a layoff, or it doesn't matter? And you're working as Florida
Correct.
versus say your company was in Pennsylvania. That's where their headquarters, and you're working remote from Florida. Are you considered a PA employee, or are you considered still Florida? Because you pay
Florida
Florida
employee.
taxes.
I was just going to say, because my taxes go to Florida, and that's who would be paying my unemployment, so it's based
That
on
that
that.
makes sense.
But
That
when you have somebody who's panicking, they lose their job, now they don't know how they're going to pay their bills, and then you add on to it the fact that maybe they live in a state, and there's a few of them, like Florida, that just don't pay.
so do
It's
you have
hard
to
to take a minute to
do they
take it
have to
in.
pay in to you have to pay into unemployment tax like we do? Wow, you must Jesus, I didn't know there was there was states with that low. I would cry too.
Yeah,
Like, you couldn't even say, okay, like let's face it, if somebody around Pennsylvania, 575 plus kids, all right, you can get by. It's going to give you that 24 weeks. And I believe as long as I had one colleague was complaining because he didn't do all the job searches that they asked. I'm like, come on,
right.
dude. How hard is it to write down 3 to
But
4
you
jobs
should
a
be
week?
doing it anyways if you're
He said he
unemployed.
didn't wanna do it. He said, "I'm not doing it." Well, he got denied, denied, and final denied
So
appeal. And
it's
I said, "Do you blame
24
him?"
weeks.
What's that?
Yours is 24 weeks.
24 weeks, and then I believe it all depends on the percentage of unemployment to where if it can be extended for another 12.
Florida's is
So,
12.
that's it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, not exactly the state you wanna live in if you lose your job.
No, that's pretty bad. I'm glad I wouldn't even know. I can see why people down in there would go like that. That would make my stomach because you can't even listen. They talk about my main thing about is if I was to get laid off, and I've twice in my life I have, is back again. I'm going to say back in the '90s, it wasn't as bad. Cobra, because Cobra back then, the companies paid 85% of that to 90. You only had to pay $150 to $200 a month. So when you got laid off, that wasn't really much at all. You had health care.
Right.
Now, there are not many companies when you get Cobra, you're almost paying the whole
Yeah.
shindig right off the bat. You're paying up to 2, 3,000 easily, sometimes even over that in a month just to keep the what you have now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not realistic. A lot of people have to let those kinds of things go.
You got it. What can you do? Because all your money, unless you're really unhealthy, all that money is has to go towards benefits. What do? You got to weigh those options.
Yep.
Again, savings, yes, it talks about, these are the kind of things that you need to save for. And I try to tell that to as many people, younger ones I can. It's like, dude, you got to figure out something. You got to save something,
Yep.
just in case those rainy days you call it. But, you're still going to have that stress, but a little bit of a break to start getting yourself together. Like, what would be the first thing you think you would do would start being
If
laid
I
off?
were to be laid off, networking
Yeah. Yeah.
immediately. Like, I
Immediately.
know that you're saying, like, take a minute to breathe, and honestly, I
I know.
believe that. I also just know
Yeah.
my personality, and I would have maybe a few hours in me of freaking out, and then it would be freaking out to the point of like, "Oh my goodness, I have to find something and I need to do it now." And I think if
Right.
I've learned anything over the years talking to candidates and experiencing and counterparts, I have friends in the talent acquisition world that have been unemployed for
Yeah.
a year and a half, 2 years because they just can't find anything.
Yep.
And when they finally do find something and I ask, I would say 95, maybe higher percent of the time, the reason they found something is from networking. They were
Right.
applying for a job and then digging through the company and reaching out to the hiring managers and finding recruiters and higher ups and reaching out to anybody they could until
That you
people
could.
start responding. It's not a network of what you know anymore,
Right.
unfortunately, or at least maybe not in all industries, but for sure in talent acquisition.
All
It's
right. I'll
not what
make you.
you know anymore, it's who you know.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll make a pact with you now. If either one of us lose our jobs, we come on to a live show and we don't get off. We don't
Until
get off
somebody
the live
hires us.
show until somebody hires. We could sit there and say,
Extreme
"All right,
hiring.
yeah, you just keep hiring." I've already thought about that. I'm like, "Wow, what would I do?" And I don't I say this respectively too, though, and I agree with what you said is if you've been in recruitment, listen, this is where we talk about this, but we're no different than anybody else.
Oh,
You gotta act on this, the same way. Like they talk about negotiating your layoff package and all that. I don't think a lot of people when they get laid off understand that whole thing, how it works, but some companies don't even, they don't give you a
A
layoff
lot
package.
of them don't. If
They don't. You're
especially if
just
they're
laid off.
doing large layoffs, it's because they can't afford you.
Right.
So they can't afford to set up a package for everybody. It's different when they're letting 1 or 2 people go in a more
Right.
senior level. Yes, a severance makes sense, but a lot of companies just don't do it. They're like, "We're letting you go. I'm not paying you to let you go."
Yep. And then it says take care of any benefits. Well, I mean, I think it comes to, you gotta, if you gotta ask a lot of questions when you do get that word, because you got to be able to reach out. You have a lot of questions. Breathe in, and say about the benefits. If there's any kind of layoff package, what are the details of it? What they were saying, to where it would be good to get a letter from your company saying that you're laid off, that you were laid off. And I'm like, okay, do you ask for a letter, or you just go out there on the world now and put it on your resume, and tell people I was laid off versus I've never had anybody give me a letter
I
saying
think
that
you
they
would
were
have
laid
to
off.
request something like that, but truth be told, I don't know what the benefit of that would be. If they wanna do a reference check, they can find that out on their own.
Right.
Um, and if if you're, applying, they're not seeing that when you submit your resume, unless you wanted to do that, like, in place of uploading a cover letter, maybe.
Right.
You see that being, but I don't know.
Right.
Um, ghosting applicants.
I'll let you take this one, and then I'll take it afterwards, my opinion with it. Hi,
Yeah,
Melissa. Oh, it's Melissa. I
um
know Melissa. She was on my show, I think, years and years ago.
well,
Oh
hello,
my god.
Melissa. What is my thought on ghosting? I think that that's a very loaded question, if I'm being honest. There's personal, there's ethical, and there's realistic. Um, Personally, I think that candidates deserve a response. I think that
Mm,
you should be reaching out, you should be helping them understand. I push really hard with my hiring managers if they're not going to proceed with a candidate to find out why, to provide them guidance in the job hunt, especially because I know how intense it can be.
yeah.
Now, I am a very considerate recruiter. I have been the one. I was when Dave and I met, it was because I was unemployed, and
Yeah.
it ended up being a total of 10 months, and it's again, Florida, 275 a week for 12 weeks. It was
Right.
not a good time in my life. So I am very compassionate and considerate, and I fight for my candidates, but I also think the reality is this is a very spread thin industry right now. There's a reason why so many people in our world are looking for work.
Yeah.
And that also means, as grateful as the ones who, myself, are that have that work, Dave,
Yep.
we're also doing a lot more now. And so I think it's giving a little bit to the human aspect of recruiting is completely necessary.
Yeah.
We cannot reach out to hundreds of people, and sometimes that's truly what it is.
It is,
And
and
so I think that's
it
a
is.
very multifaceted question in my opinion.
No, I like that. Mine has always been, listen, I agree, especially when somebody goes through you see it even on LinkedIn too. You see 2, 3, 4 interviews, 5 interviews, and then after, a couple weeks of all these interviews and then nothing. That listen,
That's unacceptable.
that's way unacceptable. You need something, and I know some recruiters don't wanna have that conversation, but you have to just you tell the truth. You just have to say it. And by email, you can whatever. There's got to be some way that you can let that candidate know. Now,
It doesn't always
how
have to be a phone call. It can be an email
yeah,
with
email.
feedback and an explanation.
Yep.
I think when I saw Melissa's question, I was thinking more from the recruitment initial call perspective. If I have an
Yeah,
interview, a pre-screen for argument's sake with a candidate, and then the hiring manager says, no, we're not going to move them forward.
right.
You have to also think on the other side, beyond the 3, 4, 5 interviews, how many positions do you see open where in 24 hours there's over 1,000 applicants?
Yeah.
We're not in a position to be able to do that. So I think it's just setting
No.
realistic expectations. If you've gone through the interview process and that recruiter isn't giving you any feedback as to why you weren't chosen, that I find to be unacceptable.
Yeah. I always try to get a reason. Sometimes, through the careers that I've been in, sometimes you can't get an explanation from the hiring manager. And I'm honest with that too. I'm like, listen, I've asked, I just did not
Yes.
really get anything. How did you feel the interview went? Talk about it for a couple minutes. But there again, have I ever forgotten? Yeah, I've gotten busy a couple times, but I've always gotten back. Maybe
Yeah.
not that day or 2, but I'm like, "Oh my god, I forgot about that?"
Well, and
Um,
sometimes it's because they reach out to me, right? They'll send a
right.
message and say, "Hey, I haven't heard anything." And that's my like, "Ooh, okay, I dropped the ball here"
Yep,
moment. And that's when I'll respond. So I do actually tell my candidates when I talk to them early on, "Hey, look, I have a lot on my plate right now. If I
yep.
don't get back to you and you need information, please reach out to me. I'll be sure to get you what you need."
Yeah, 'cause any you're gonna respond when somebody when they reach out to you,
Of
follow. It's just
course.
common courtesy. And she says, "That's what I'm hearing about after multiple interviews, ghosting, an email would be fair." Yeah, and I
Yeah, I
agree,
think an
you know?
email is appropriate. I think asking for phone calls for every single person who doesn't make it through the process is probably not realistic, but again, Melissa, I do not find completely ignoring a candidate after multiple rounds to be an
Yeah.
appropriate course of action. I think truthfully, just like the hard truth, if you're going to do that, you shouldn't be a recruiter.
No,
You
because
don't
I
deserve
hear
that
the
job.
excitement, you're the recruiter, and you hear that excitement with the candidates, you're like and then you kinda know where they're going, what direction you think about it, and you're like, "Listen, I'm normal," and I've sat there on a Saturday last Saturday, went to the Walmart with my son, I'm thinking my son's like, "Well," I'm like, "Ugh." I had gotten a text, and I'm like, "Oh, man," I said, I know he's not gonna make" he didn't make it, and I gotta tell him Monday.
Yeah.
That's hard because you got that excitement and 2 or 3 times, and I think that's makes me normal, and yourself
Yeah.
as a recruiter, it's, "Man, I don't wanna give the news to you," but, like, you were so excited, and you're like, "Oh my god, I hate it." That's the part I
I don't
dread.
wanna always cook dinner for my kids either, but they have to eat. You have
I
jobs,
know.
you have responsibilities, and you have to
Yep,
follow through with them.
and you gotta go through, so, I wanted to ask you, though, I mean, since you worked remote for a lot of the years and everything like that, and what Melissa was saying, like on LinkedIn, when you see that remote job come up, now they'll only put 100. They put a 100 next to it because that means
100
there's
plus.
thousands. That means
Uh-huh.
there's thousands because they used to put a high number, but
Yeah.
usually, like, you get that alert. Like, I had one of the colleagues say to me, I said, "I got that alert, Rich. What did you do?" And he says, "Oh, I don't have it set up." I'm like, "Dude, that has said 6 applicants, and if you pay that 237, for your career, you can at least see who the hiring manager is, and you can
Mhm.
find it if you don't. You can find out who does it, and you need to act on that now because by tomorrow, there you go. You have
Get in
1,000,
early.
yeah, 1,000 applicants, 1,000 applicants for there." Melissa has one more thing if you wanna take that one.
Yeah, she said it's a different world we're in with the hiring process. I want to prepare my people for how to navigate. I wind up saying they may not want to work with that company.
Yeah,
So I think that's fair, Melissa. I also think it depends on if that's an internal recruiter or if that's an external recruiter.
yeah,
Because if, let's say, that's an agency recruiter, or for prime example, I am RPO. So I don't work directly for the client that I support. So if I were that recruiter who was not following up, who was not
right,
doing what needed to be done, that could not be on the hiring manager or the company itself. It could fall to the recruiter and then judgments being passed maybe on the wrong person.
yeah.
Now, if you're talking about an internal recruiter, I do agree that that's likely company values and lack of moral um, or lack of morale. Uh,
No,
and
I
I
agree.
tend to agree with what you're saying.
No, it is, and I agree on that. But like we were saying there too, is with that remote, and people have much harder. I get a lot of people that message me and say, "Hey, Dave, you hear anything remote?" And all I say to them, I'm like, "Listen, remote now is, I believe, it's got to be one of the hardest to find
It is.
anymore because." With all those applicants, and I think I know it all, and I don't, because I say to myself, what would I do? What would I do if I was on remote and I really wanted? I don't care for remote work. That's just me.
Right.
I did that because with the company I did it all the wrong way. I would have to do it differently if I did do it. But there again, you got to have a plan, on how you're going to get yourself out. How are you, Kylie, going to get yourself out in front of 2,000 freaking applicants?
Again, it comes back to networking. I just think
Yeah,
people undervalue the power of it. And it feels tedious, right? You're already
yeah,
putting in all this effort to find the right jobs, to submit your application. You're
yeah.
already tired. It's already daunting. And this just feels like realistically another 30 minutes per application that you put in.
Right.
But if you're being conscious, you're being selective of, you're welcome, Melissa. If you're being conscious of the way that you're applying, you're not just going out and applying for everything,
See,
which I think
that's the mistake a lot,
we
but
tend to do that though when we're panicked, right? We're like, I'm putting my hat into the ring for everything I can find. I need a job. I needed it yesterday. I just need to be in front of people. But if you
right.
take a step back from that approach, you tailor your resume to each role. Take
Yep,
your time that you would have spent on 15 easy applies of jobs that you really aren't qualified and you don't want. Spend that time tailoring your resume. That takes 5 minutes.
yeah,
And then take the other 20 minutes to reach out, figure out who's a part of that network, reach out to those people, send them personally that updated, tell them that you applied
yep.
and see what comes. I think it's not that the timing spent is different, it's just time better spent.
That makes sense. It does, because I had a young lady from New York reach out to me, and she just reached out and said she wanted to set up a call. She had lost her job, and she's really having a hard time. I'm like, "You know what? You message me for that, I'm gonna do it." So we spent about an hour and a half I did with her on a v video call, and I talked about everything, like her resume. She's very skilled, but that resume really needed work.
Yeah.
It was not good at all. So I got her through the on Fever the Girl I do over in Great
Yeah.
Britain, wherever she is. It was $80 plus your tip, and now she's been getting hits. And she's learning about the network, because then she messaged me, Dave, Ken West over in Crayola. Oh yeah, I've known Ken for over 7 years. I said, just tell him my name, that I recommended you, because I wouldn't send you to anybody else like that. I'm excited to hear back, at least if she got, as long as you're getting something, some kind of traction.
Well, it shows that what's
Yeah.
what's being changed is positive change, that it's working.
Yep. And so for her, I was like, there you go. You got to get that network. It takes time, but how's it working for you now?
Right. Yeah.
When I see people 800, and don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say this meanly or anything, but when they say that 800 resumes you're sending out, how do you even find 800? I mean,
Correct.
that's just me, maybe in a time frame, certain amount, but wow, a couple weeks, unless I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, it goes back to what I was saying. These are people that are panic applying, and
Right.
which means they're also, I think what I try to tell people that are going through that is when you panic apply, you're not qualified, which
I
means
like that. Panic.
you're going to get more rejection emails.
Right.
And what does that do to your sense of self-worth?
Right.
Every time you see that rejection email, it deflates you a little bit farther. So instead of putting yourself out there to roles that you know you're not going to get, and then
Yep.
putting yourself in a position to have to read all of these rejection emails that you're going to get, take the step back, use the time a little bit more
Yeah.
productively, and get yourself in front of the right people so that you don't
Yep.
have to go through that.
That's the thing. And around here, I gave her advice. I said, listen, get out of the house, take a ride, pull into all these, corporate buildings that you see around, different things that have all the names of the companies, right? Write them down. That's what I used to do. I used to take a ride. I'd write the names down, pull in a parking lot, write it down. That's where the research started. Because I told people, go back, because some of these, not all companies put their jobs when you get laid off on Indeed, or they always don't put them on the job
Right.
boards. Some of them, it's very expensive for companies to do that, first of
Yes.
all. So a lot of them will put it on their website, and then, some of them go to LinkedIn and everything like that. But I think that's underdone, is the research. Like you said, you got to really spend the quality time, and I'd rather go after 10 really good jobs than 500 every
Yeah.
day. Okay, yeah, well, I got up and I looked at, Indeed. All right, do you have your resume on Indeed? Do you have it on ZipRecruiter? Do you have it on Career Builder? Do you have it on Munster? Do you have it on Yahoo? And if you say no to that, that is 5 to 6 people where recruiters use for a passive search, which I call Bodine. Bodine was a Bodine. It's called a Bodine. Bodine, I think it is, where you're in Indeed, where you're typing in
Boolean.
the skill. Yeah, you're typing in the skills, and then guess what? Your resume is going to come up.
Yeah,
And
Boolean searches.
Brilliant,
So it
that's
is
it.
something
Yeah,
that
that was horrible, right? That
yeah,
tells my knowledge.
something that recruiters use on a regular basis. There's
Yeah.
an algorithm and a way that you can
Yep.
type in skill sets, companies,
Yep.
and not only can you put in what you're looking for, but you can actually remove keywords that if it's
Right.
on the resume, you don't want them to show up. And it is how we go through and find candidates. So when you hear people talking about maximizing the
Yeah.
productivity of your resume with keywords, it's the reason why. So if there's softwares that you utilize that you don't
Yeah.
have on your resume, put them on there.
Yep.
Another thing that I had somebody tell me that I thought was really great advice is if you don't want to overload your resume visually with all of these random keywords,
Yeah,
on the
definitely.
bottom of one of the pages, list out every single one of those keywords separately, every one of them, then turn the font white. They won't show up on your resume. No recruiter will see them, but they will still pull in the algorithms when a recruiter is searching.
Wow, it's funny you say that because, and I'll talk to you offline about this, but there's a way to do that even with job postings,
Oh, yeah,
and
I've done it too.
oh, okay, all right. So, oh, yeah, and there's great ways to do different things, and that's but there again, that's what a recruiter uses for tools to try to find people. It comes
Right. And
down
I
to
think
because we want that direct hire. We want that job. We wanna give it to
right.
somebody.
Well, and I think from a candidate perspective, especially for anybody who's not trying to find work in the talent
Right,
acquisition world, these are little things that they don't know. And
right.
so when we're talking about layoffs and how to get past all of it, I think having those little tips and tricks in your arsenal
Yep,
are knowing how a recruiter thinks and what they're looking for is going to be incredibly beneficial.
it is. Do you think when somebody's 2, 3 layoffs or even on a resume, you're getting laid off, do you think that hurts them to get a new job? Well, I mean,
Yes.
not hurt, but, you
Yes.
know, you think so? Wow, that was quick.
Absolutely.
Wow, that
Absolutely.
was quick.
Well,
Oh,
because it's a fight that I have with my hiring managers on over the last 5 years, they're fights that I've had to have. I am fortunate enough that it is something I feel passionately about, that we
okay,
shouldn't be making those judgments. So I coach my hiring managers. Not all recruiters do. They'll take a hiring manager's response at face value, right? Here's the resume, here's my phone screen notes. No, I'm not interested. Okay, fine, on to the next.
right.
So I think if you have a recruiter who's not willing to push back and sit down and say, hey, but let's take a look at this. Let's break this down. Let's look at why they've been laid off. Let's talk about what it looked like, as I mentioned earlier, what their tenure prior to the economy turn was. And then I'll have, oh, well, they were great for this little bit, but in 07, 8, 9, they were all over the place. Well, that was the other economy crash. Like, let's actually apply a little bit of economy to it. Not all recruiters do that. Honestly, I hate to say it, but I think a lot of them do not.
But I
So,
really
yes,
look
I
into
think
I
it does.
really yeah, because I'll look at that and I'll be like, "All right, there's gotta be a reason. All right,
Right. See, that's
for
how
this
I am
job."
too. I
Yeah,
get
because 'cause I'll be like,
investigative.
and I told the one person was a couple months ago, I was like, "Listen, I'm not worried about the first 2, 3 jobs. Don't worry about that. I'm looking down here. I'm
Right.
looking at this part where you had 8 years or 10 years as you did
Mhm.
this. I can explain all we can talk about the up here. Something went wrong. I'll just say
Yeah.
something must have went wrong, and that I'm okay with that. But I want to focus here. What did you do here? Because there again, it depends on the recruiter. And then when you're getting laid off like that, they're going to say, okay, they'll take that, your yes and no, just within a couple seconds. They'll be like, no, he's got
Mhm.
too many jobs. But that you might have not looked into that really well enough to say,
Correct,
oh, but you didn't see the 15 years at the company that you're trying to look for that kind of skill set.
correct. I
You
just
know?
did it, a couple weeks ago maybe. Since 2020, the candidate that I was looking at had had 3 jobs.
Right.
And prior to that, it was a 10-year tenure and an 8 or 9 years at the prior company. And so I was like, well, that to me looks like a COVID problem. That looks like companies doing reorgs and eliminating positions or
Right.
over hiring and having to let a bunch of people like that's what that looks like to me. So I liked his experience enough that it was worth the phone call. It was worth digging in a little. I didn't present him to the hiring manager. It was let me see what this looks like. And it ended up being somebody who went through the process
Who went
and
through it.
yeah, but it had to be a conversation. It was and my hiring manager did ask about it. Well, but look at this. And I was like, I get it. Here's where we're at.
Right.
And so, but you have to be willing to advocate for your candidates in that way
Right.
and look, and it
That
goes
right
back,
there it is. Right there it is. That's the key word. Yep.
but it goes back to the AI conversation, which I know isn't tonight's topic, but it's relevant. And when you're talking about this, is that there's so much AI being used,
Yeah.
and AI doesn't look, it has a very set algorithm and it's not using the human element of, oh, 2020, everything blew up. Oh, oh
Right.
09, the economy crashed. Those are both the times that this candidate had issues. Probably wasn't their fault. And
Right.
that goes away. And
Do
I
you think that
can't do
say
this job
that
without
in your opinion, would it be, some people have that job description, I mean, on their resume, and they'll put in parentheses layoff, contract, layoff, contract. you know, I I go back and forth on that. I like it because not everybody, like I said, you get laid off and, you gotta do what you gotta do to pay the bills. At 275 a week, wow, but you still wanna look like you're working too or you're volunteering or anything. But at the same point, I'm trying to think is it best to put on, okay, like, hey, layoff, contract work. So this way that person knows, a recruiter, okay, contract work, maybe that's why they lost their job or something like that along that.
Well, so contract I think is good to put on there because
Yeah.
likely you're signing a lot of contracts, it doesn't have an option for extension.
Right.
So for me, I'm like, oh, well, I see 4 jobs that say contract that were all 3 or 6 months apiece. He probably was taking, or she was probably taking roles that didn't offer extension, but this was to
Yeah.
make sure that they had money coming in, that they were working.
And some of them pay
Layoff,
off. I've seen some of them pay off for some people.
yeah,
Wow, they get hired full time, and if
yep,
they tell you contract in the beginning, then, with a staffing company or wherever you're working, there's nothing wrong with it, you
no.
know?
The layoff, though, I do question that sometimes. I think if you have multiple, that starts to look
Right.
less like a company problem and more like a company using layoff to get rid of you problem. Um,
Yeah, there's different reasons.
right.
But
So I think if you're doing multiples, I would advocate to leave it off. If you had a one-off where you're trying to explain why you had one random that didn't have good tenure on it,
right.
or that you were only there for 4 months. I think that putting layoff on maybe a single is okay. I think doing it for
Yeah.
multiples can tend to make it look like it's a you problem and companies aren't admitting it.
Well, I've had people say during an interview too, it's like, "Oh, yeah, I got laid off, but I took 6 months." I took the layoff and I just took it as long as I could take it. I'm like, "Okay. All
Well,
right."
I have actually spoke to a gentleman today who was like,
Yeah,
my company did a restructure and I took the time. I've been working my whole life and I
yeah,
decided to take, 6 months to be with my family, to be with my wife, to be with,
yeah,
and, just taking that opportunity. So I think if you're seeing it on multiple occasions, maybe not. I think if you're seeing, and I hate to say it, if you're seeing a young person doing that, that makes me question work ethic.
yeah,
So yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that go into how I would feel about it, but most of those aren't going to come off of a piece of paper. It's going to
with all
come from
that.
a
I've
conversation.
told people, and I've had 6 jobs in my career, and I'm 59, so there we go, 56 jobs in my career and plus the military, which that's not too bad.
No.
But I 3 of those jobs that lasted, one over 10 and one everything, I got from staffing companies, and if I was to lose my job tomorrow, first of all, some of the staffing companies get bad raps, which I get it because some of them are, it depends on where you're going, but I would always tell people, listen, what I did is I Googled the top 10. I know which ones are professional ones that, listen, they're recruiters and they're companies that want your resume because they want to get that 10, 20, 25% direct hire fee.
Yep.
So when you go to these companies, apply, and this is just me. I say apply to as many, but you got to be careful. I'm going to tell you why. You're going to want to tell that company, like say you went to, let's just say Manpower or something like that. All right, you know what? My job, I want 110,000 a year. I want a direct hire. I do not want to work contract, any part,
Yep.
anything. I just want direct hire. That's it. And tell them the pay rate. Okay, good. Because then one day you're going to get a phone call, maybe 6 months down the road. Hey, Dave, we got this position. And I got it on a Sunday night. And I was like, wow, that was a great feeling. You want to be careful with some of the staffing companies because if you're working contract, if you tell them, if I went into them and I said, you know what, I make, I want $25 an hour, nothing less, right? But I really want to make more if I can. You got to be careful because when you get laid off or something like that, you try to collect unemployment. And a staffing company, they're going to come after you and say, well, if they have to pay that unemployment claim, well, you turn this job down. That might have been 18. I'm just using a number as an example. $3 cheaper, $4 cheaper. You got to be careful there but you got to be very specific. This is what I want. Don't call me unless this is what you are.
Right.
So really look at it that and I think you'll look at it and like Joel just said here, Joel, everything is negotiable. And that's true. But
It
my
is
point
true.
there is staffing companies are great to get in there because they are looking you're in a way, you're almost the same way as me. If you're looking for direct hire, man, I want that resume. I
Yeah.
want you in front of me, boy, because I'm going to get a placement and a good placement. You're talking some good money.
Yeah.
So really just tell the staffing companies what you want. And they're a great way. There you have it. You have 5, 6 staffing companies looking for a job for you. You're doing your research. You have your job boards, everybody doing all that work if you have it in their, ZipRecruiter. And I'm going to go to another question, but ZipRecruiter is really well. It's that little bot. You train that. You train that person. Like deny the jobs, put the reason why,
Yeah.
and it really you'll get less resumes. You'll get less jobs. I'm sorry, less jobs, but better ones.
Yeah. It
You-
tailors to you. It's
Yeah,
your job board of Netflix. The more you use it, the more the more interactive you are, the better the
it is.
algorithm.
It is, and I see it all the time. I like that. Everything is negotiable.
Yeah, me too.
My one boss would always tell me everything's for sale, Dave. Even my wife. I was like, Jesus, he's the owner of the company. It's like
He said
everything's
even
for
my
sale.
wife.
Yeah, he goes, even my wife. I was like, all right, well,
All right
everything's
then.
for sale. A couple more things like we talked about would just, let's face it, layoff sucks. It just, and I want to go back to you is what do you say about people that's all they want is the remote and trying what are some really tricks besides networking else you can think of that you'd want to do?
Stop thinking that all you're going to do is work remote. That ship sailed. It just has.
Yeah,
Like
I
I
know.
just think unless
I
you're
like
in
that.
an industry like IT or something where it truly is remote, even these huge companies that you don't need to be in,
Right.
I Google, you're not remote anymore. Like,
Yeah.
and that is a company that you could very easily. It literally lives on the internet in everybody's homes, and even they don't want their people remote. So I think just taking the and I hate saying it this way, and there are probably few people that
No.
won't like what I have to say on this, but take the silver spoon of entitlement that COVID gave you out of your mouth and sit on a realistic platform here
Yeah.
because you're not going to get likely not going to get a remote role. I'm fully
Yeah.
aware, even now in talent acquisition, there's
It's
no
hard.
reason for me to need to go to an office. None. But if I were to lose my job tomorrow, if I limited myself to remote, I better be prepared for another 6 months to a
Oh,
year and
definitely.
a half
Yep.
of unemployment. It's just the reality. Everybody wants remote. There are so many people looking. I think the best way to set yourself apart is to not be looking for remote, to
Right.
not be pressing that because everybody else is. So find the stuff that's local to you. Take the hybrid schedule.
Yeah,
Go
there's
get
nothing
some
like
human
hybrid.
interaction. Like just go. Go to
Yeah, you're
work.
not gonna turn it down. You're certainly not gonna turn it down because
But
again,
people
that
do. I've had
yeah,
people do.
they
They
turn it
turn
down.
down good offers because they are so gung ho, which I think is where my comment about the silver spoon comes from. If
Right.
you want a job, then
Yeah.
take the job. Like this was not a platform, a utilized platform, if you will, up until a few years ago. So
Right.
while I understand the enjoyment, and I work it, I've been
Yeah.
remote for
Yeah.
5 years, so I have a lot of respect for it. But also, I am fully aware that if tomorrow my boss called me in and said, "Kylie, we're laying you off or letting you go. You suck at your job. Goodbye."
Right.
Whatever it was, if they did that, I would not be exclusive. Would I still apply to remote roles? Of course I would.
Yeah.
Would I
There's
be
nothing.
resting on that being the next job I got? Not if I actually want one.
Right. I know. That's when it comes down to it. That's why I say there it's because of that reason. Because I don't know the real answer. I agree with you 100% that the networking is, if I had to say what is the top,
In
it's because
every
I've
way.
had people really reaching out to me saying, this person, this person. And all it takes is a message on LinkedIn, just that
Right.
one message or two. And LinkedIn, like in our area, we have this thing called Friends of Pete group. Every once a month they have a meeting somewhere. They'll pick a bar or like a nice restaurant, something like that, and it's from 4 to 8 p.m. Let me tell you, when you go there, man, dress up, go out there, you will see almost in every industry, they're going to every 10 minutes you move, you're going to be like, oh, you need to talk over here. You're looking for a job here. You're looking for electrician. You look for plumbing. You look here. You'll love it. You'll actually be like, this is freaking awesome. It gets you that person that you can talk to, at least to give some advice. They have owners of staffing companies that go to it as well.
Well, and I think that's the thing that gets misconstrued, right? Is when I say networking, I am not exclusively saying sending
Yeah. Yeah.
messages on LinkedIn
Yeah.
for join the junior league in your area that
Yeah.
is all young business professionals and go once a month to those meetings where
Same
you're
thing.
meeting like-minded people who have and network. Go
Yeah.
to take advantage, go to job fairs, even if it's not necessarily the job you want, introduce yourself to the companies, find
Yep.
out what other options. You have a lot of free time. You're not working. Go.
You feel the same way. I agree with you 100%. I know people say job fairs, but you got to go in there with the intention of just to meet that person. Because
Correct.
take that card. I take the cards. I'll take them because
And
I
then
have a whole
send the
stack.
email and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, it was great meeting you. And I'm sorry that the job that you had, open wasn't in line, but
Yep.
really loved the company and loved meeting you and chatting. Please let me know if anything like this opens up." There is no such
Yep.
thing as having your resume in too many hands.
No, no, I'll take it. The more it's out there, it's just really gonna help, and
Yeah, and
I'm
honestly,
glad.
if that person at the job fair really enjoyed talking to you, and it just so happens that their buddy owns a business that is in
Yeah,
line with what you're doing, and you just made an impression on them, now it's, "You know what? I actually have somebody I can connect you with." And it's all because you took 10 minutes to get out from behind your computer and actually have a
and get
real
out.
organic interaction with another human being. And I just think that that's gone now. I miss when applying to jobs was walking in and filling out a piece of paper.
Oh my god, that
I
was
just do.
there
Um,
there were some people on LinkedIn that say they've been mailing their resumes to the company, going
that's
back to
awesome.
even old school. Just send a handwritten letter, type whatever you want with your resume, put attention HR, everybody that always goes to HR.
I love that. I think that's a
Yeah,
wonderful idea. Find ways to set yourself apart, but I think
yeah.
at the end of it, it's just this apply button is not
No, I
enough.
can't stand that easy apply. I can't stand it. Oh
Oh,
my
I wasn't
god.
even talking easy
Oh,
apply. That is the worst.
that is the
But
worst.
just an application button now is
Yep,
just not enough. You have to be willing to go the extra mile, and it sucks. Let's be honest,
yeah.
because this didn't used to be the way that it was to find a job.
No, it
But
was
you can't
crazy.
complain about how it is and how it used to be. You just have to get on board with what it is now and figure out how to do it best.
I like it. All right, young lady, as normal, I swear, I do my trees,
I already know
all
what
my
you're
work
gonna say.
all my work today, and I'm not kidding you, all my work, all my notes before the show, working on it, and I don't even talk about a quarter of it, so
Well,
I've
at
learned
least you were
something now.
prepared.
This goes into a file now because now it's like I can go back. I don't have to
Mhm.
write down everything like that. But we've been going for 52 minutes, so
Yes, we have.
you'll have to share this on your page because I think it was a different link. But
Oh, yeah.
I'll get it straight for next time. Um, it'll work out a lot better, and we can get it out there more so. So thank you so much as always for coming on.
Yeah, pleasure.
And stay warm or stay 76
Plenty
degrees.
warm.
What's that?
Plenty warm.
Funny warm, right?
It was in the
So
80s today. Plenty warm.
right.
But not that I know the difference anyways. I'm holed up in my office all day, so it could
Yeah,
be
right. Yeah,
20
that's right.
degrees,
Yeah,
it
you're
could be
sitting
100
inside.
degrees.
You gotta go outside though, son, don't you?
I
You
do
go outside and work?
no. I need
No?
my monitors. Nope, I am not a laptop worker. I'll do
No.
it if I'm, like, traveling, if I have to, but I have 3 monitors, and I am a brat when it comes to it. Like, I have a secondary travel one that
Right.
attaches to my laptop that I bring. Like, I'm a brat with it. I'm like, "I need
Okay.
multiples." Can't do it.
Multiples. Alright, Ace, I'll talk to you right after this.
Yeah, they